Many thanks for joining me on the program. I am Mary Kanu. Niger has a new military leader in the person of General Abdurrahmani Chiani following the shocking coup in the Sahel country. Chiani, head of Niger's presidential guard, named himself head of a transitional government in the West African country after overthrowing democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum last Wednesday. The general, who addressed himself as president of the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, described the coup as a response to the degradation of the security situation linked to jihadist bloodshed. The coup happened just over a week after Nigerian President Bola Tinubu, who also doubles as chairman of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, hosted Bazoum and the presidents of Benin and Guinea-Bissau in Abuja. ECOWAS has demanded Bazoum's immediate release, saying he remains the legitimate and legal president of Niger and has so far imposed sanctions and threatened force by Sunday if Niger's coup leaders fail to reinstate ousted Bazoum within a week. In response, the military leaders in Niger have warned against any military intervention. In a statement read on national television, how then is President Tinubu, the ECOWAS chairman, expected to handle this development? What steps should be taken to resolve this conflict? African Affairs Analyst Achike Chude joins me on the program to speak on this. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, it is quite ironic that, shortly after President Tinubu hosted presidents of some African nations, including Niger, to set up a standby force to counter terrorism and stop military coups in the sub-region, President Bazoum would be overthrown from office. Do you think the president, that's Nigeria's president, is prepared for the challenges of this development in Niger?
I do not think so. I do not think so. I think that he spoke too soon. Before I don't think that he has been able to study the situation in the West African sub-region. Before doing that, and there's a saying that you look before you leap. So I think he did the opposite. And I think a few days ago, the former president Jonathan, went to see him. And I read in the news today, that he was giving reasons why he went to see President Bola Tinubu. That it was to brief him about what was going on in the West African sub-region. Of course, you know that President Jonathan was appointed by the ECOWAS to head the missions in some of these countries where coups are taking place. And so he, more than any other person, knows all the dynamics that are going on. And if President Tinubu had gotten that briefing before he made that statement, it would have helped him. Because, I don't think right now, not having studied the situation in the West African sub-region, that he can make certain statements and commitments on behalf of other West African countries. Yes, West African countries are worried about the spate of coups, in the sub-region. So the issue is, what do we do? And then, without consultation, I'm not sure that he consulted with them for them to take a common position before he made the statement he made, because that statement gives the impression that anytime there's a coup, that the sub-region, the sub-regional government will do something about it, hinting possibly at a possible military intervention in those countries. Now, that has a lot of implications.
Now, Mohamed Bazoum was sworn in as president in April 2021 in Niger's first democratic transfer of power since independence in 1960. So what do you think is the reason for this coup attempt threatening the country's young democracy?
Look, it's the same reason they give all the time. The military adventurers give all the time. And at the initial stage, it seems that, when they began, don't forget that we've also had our own share of coups in Nigeria. And so it's the same reason they give, a reason of either social stability, the need to protect the country from external aggression, the corruption that goes on in the country, and then the joblessness, the economy. These are of course, all of these things are encapsulated by one word: misgovernance. We know that misgovernance has been going on for a very long time in Africa, and especially now, specifically West Africa. And so, anytime these soldiers strike, it is essentially for the purpose of bringing some order into the polity, and then to put the country on the right path, give the country the right direction. That is what they have always done. But beyond that, I think we need to begin to demystify these reasons that they give. The reality is that they are military adventurers. They want to test what the politicians are testing because they believe that the politicians are generally corrupt, which is not a lie. It's not about wiping out corruption. It's also about using their power in an undemocratic way to get to power to do what the politicians are doing. I think that this is essentially what is happening. They also want their own share of the cake, of the national cake. That is what I suspect is actually leading or responsible for these coups. But again, we cannot completely rule out 100% the fact that misgovernance gives these military adventurers an opportunity to undemocratically short circuit the system and to take over the reins of power, suspend the constitution also.
Now, we know this is not the first coup attempt in Niger. In March 2021, there was also a move when a military unit tried to seize the presidential palace days before Bazoum, who had just been elected, was due to be sworn in. What do you think Africa has, why do you think, rather, Africa has a penchant for staging coups, especially looking at the events in Burkina Faso, Guinea, and also Mali?
Yeah, I think that it's a very sad commentary about our state of affairs, about the degree of development in the continent, especially the degree of politics in the continent. Our people are not exactly educated on the nuances of democracy and governance. And so that's why the elites and the military boys keep on taking them for a ride. One can say that we have not experienced that the period within which we have practiced democracy in the continent is little compared to what other countries have done, the countries that we're trying to emulate at the West. Some of them, their countries are as old, or their democracies as old as 250 years, 200 years. That's a very long time for democracy to consolidate. But that should not be used as an excuse for why we're not getting it right. And so I think the period of that these countries have been under democracy, have been a bit short. But beyond that is the fact that one has to be careful when you are transiting a country to democracy. In fact, there's a research that says that there's the risk of turmoil and social unrest and crisis is higher for those countries that are transiting from either military dictatorship to a democracy. It takes time, but it is full of danger. It is full of, the possibility of conflict is exceedingly always very high. So one should be careful, even when you are introducing democracies to certain countries, and to make sure that it is done in a way that is appropriate, in a way that will not, as much as possible, create crisis within the polity.
So why then do you think, or what do you think of the potential, say, implications of this, given how much Western countries have invested in Niger in terms of money and security? Could this coup complicate Western efforts to help countries in the region fight, the rebellion that has spread so far?
Yeah, well, the implications, obviously, the implications is that the major implication is that these countries will go back many years in terms of the practice of democracy, because what you have done is to truncate democracy. Then once you do that, there are obviously, implications, because the period within which, democracy will be learned through some of the challenges that are posed by democracy. Don't forget that once challenges are met, you have to look for ways around these challenges. And so this is what African countries have been doing. They have not exactly done a fantastic job. But, with this takeover, what it tells you is that it ingrains the military psyche more into the minds of the people. And it's not going to do anything about changing the economy because the military boys are not known for managing economies. They are not trained to run a government. They are trained to fight. They are trained to kill. That is their training. And so when you put them in charge of running a government, they are not going to do a good job of it. Obviously, we have seen it across the continent, where we have had successions or series of military coups. So that's one major area that the major implication of what is going on. And then over time, they cannot remain in power for some time, even if the people accept them for now, because they are also upset about the misgovernance by the politicians, by the political class. So there's always that tendency, like we saw in Guinea, that sometimes when coups take place, because the citizens have not been happy with the way they were treated under the civilian dispensation, there's always that tendency for them to celebrate the coming of the military.
All right, now we have to go on a break now. So let's take a break. But when we return, the program will continue. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. The coup in Niger and announcement of a new transitional leader has generated worry, with many wondering what is next for the region and also Africa. African Affairs Analyst Achike Chude is still here with us to discuss this. Now, the rebel soldiers have, so far ignored President Tinubu's warning to desist or face dire consequences for their actions. So what then should be the president's next line of action?
The president has challenge. He has challenges. Wait, let me, I will refute even the statement from the president. He has challenges. He's been talking about financial challenges in the country. That is the reason why they removed subsidy that is causing unprecedented hardship on Nigerians. He has challenges raising enough money for palliatives for the citizens of this country. And, so they have been busy increasing or taxing the people one way or the other, the people that are already overtaxed, overburdened, just because they want to be able to mobilize more funds, to raise more funds, to be able to carry out government activities. So there's a challenge. And when he says there is no challenge in terms of mobilizing resources, what he's saying is that he knows that we are okay. We don't have, the country is spending about 93% of the country's budget to service debt. So how are you going to? Of course, there's challenge, and it's going to be and it's even perhaps the challenge is even going to be more when it comes to other ECOWAS countries, because if you are going to have an intervention force, for instance, in the sub-region, you will be sure that Nigeria will pick the bill, the highest bill. Nigeria might end up spending about 70 to 75% of her resources, and use about 70 to 75%, of the soldiers that will be deployed for that purpose. So the resources, so we end up carrying the burden of a lot of these West African countries. Beyond that is the fact that Nigeria is already being faced with all kinds of insecurity challenges across the country. And our men, our soldiers are dispatched all over in various theaters of conflict. So where are you going to get the men to be able to do that? Already, we don't have enough. People have been complaining that in terms of the numbers, we do not have enough numbers to be able to properly secure this country from all of the crises, the violence that we're seeing all over the country. Then you now have to commit resources that we're also looking for the purposes of fighting insurgency in the country. You have to commit that to an West African force, and also commit men that we don't have enough of, to the same effort. So these are some of the problems, and you can be sure if we are facing these problems, it is worse with some of these West African countries. They do not have the money to be able to embark on this. They also are facing, some of them are facing insurgency challenges, insecurity challenges in their own countries, and they've not been able to handle it. So these are some of the implications of perhaps maybe raising an intervention force, unless they are going to get funding from the international community. And I think the international community is actually becoming very tired, bringing money for things like this.
So President Tinubu has, assured that he has no challenge raising financial resources to combat terrorism and other forms of insecurity within its territories. But is the region proactive enough to counter coup attempts and terrorism?
It's going to be a big one because, like I said, if he's going to look, the only thing based on the warning that he gave about 2 weeks ago, the only other thing he can do is not to plead with the soldiers to placate them. They are not going to be placated. All they want is power. All they want to do is to be in power. So the only way, so what it means is that, and then Tinubu himself says the sub-region will no longer tolerate it. So the implication is that there will be some conflict. That means that the only thing that Tinubu can do now, the president can do, is to mobilize his colleagues across, West Africa, for the purpose of building, having a force, that is capable of intervening in some of these countries and forcibly removing some of these, coupists, and the soldiers behind them. But the implications for that, what we did in Sierra Leone and Liberia is, the situation is different. The context is different. The kind of conflict that some of these groups are waging is different. It's not a conventional warfare. The soldiers face themselves. It's more like that. So the wars that are being fought now is such that it's more or less a hit and run kind of operation. And so they are not going to stand to face you. And that's what we're seeing, suicide bombings here and there, terrorist attack, and then the people disappear. So if they begin, assuming we're able to, the West African force is able to dislodge some of these people, they can align with other dangerous elements that are troubling the West African sub-region for the purpose of causing more problems in their country. So it's complex. It's not like before.
All right, now finally, before I let you go, with this development, how safe is Nigeria?
No, I don't think there's not anything new that will happen because it's already happening. Don't forget that the whole of the Sahel region really has been facing insecurity issues. And that has also had an effect on Nigeria. The same way that, Nigeria started experiencing Boko Haram activities. And then that spread to other parts of, West Africa, even Cameroon itself, which is that is outside of West Africa. They were, because we have a common border, so they were able to also trouble other countries. And that's why, as much as possible, you want to make sure that your neighbors are at peace, that they have internal peace, because if they do not, the possibility of them, exporting crisis into your own country is there. So there's going to be nothing new. If you have people coming from across the border from Niger, for instance, to Nigeria, it's something that has been happening before now. And another implication of this coup, you want to ask yourself is, what will be the position and the disposition of the soldiers to fighting the insurgency? And I think that it's the reason why the ECOWAS mission has not exactly succeeded in some of the things they were doing in the past in those countries where they were tasked with making sure that the military goes back. The military who are taking power will go back to the barracks. Part of the problems they've had is that if they don't engage them properly, they might not be able to do a good job fighting the insurgents. So perhaps the insurgents have used that as a weapon, as blackmail. That if you remove us, who is going to fight the insurgency that you need to be fought? So these are some of the implications too, of that.
All right, now, African Affairs Analyst Achike Chude, thank you very much for your time and your contribution. So that's how much we can take on this edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I am Mary Kanu. Bye for now.